Hi there, can everyone hear me? Oh, the microphone works nicely up here. Okay, good. Hello, my name's Trevor. I'm the Executive Director at the Ammonia Energy Association. I wanted to talk a little bit about certification. The Ammonia Energy Association is a global organization. We're a trade association. We've got about 240 companies that are our members around the world. And our role is to sort of connect, bridge across the regions, but also across the value chain. So we try and get the electric utilities sitting down with the fertilizer companies, the container shipping companies sitting down with the electrolyzer manufacturers, trying to help connect that value chain and accelerate the energy transition. If anybody in the room doesn't know why I'm talking about ammonia at a hydrogen conference, this is a really quick slide. So ammonia is like half the hydrogen market today. You use hydrogen to make ammonia, which you use to make fertilizers. So we have about 180 million tons of ammonia that we make every year and that we ship around the world. These numbers come from the Mission Possible Partnership report that came out last year. Gives you a nice idea. There's two steps of our mission. Step one, we need to decarbonize ammonia production, which means we need to decarbonize half of the hydrogen currently produced on the planet just to do that, and that's 1% of global emissions. So, easy to understand that mission, very hard to achieve, and we need to work at it. It's called a hard-to-abate industry for a reason. But if you can do that, then all of a sudden you've got a low-carbon molecule, and you could use it in other places that would be really useful. You could move it through space and time. That's a phrase I use to describe the difference between what you can do with ammonia and what you can do with hydrogen or with electrons. And understanding the role of the different molecules in the different areas of the future energy system is really key to understanding where's a good place to place these electrons if you're going to turn them into molecules and which molecule you ultimately want to be turning them into. So this little gray dot shows you the fertilizer market today, and this beautiful sunrise is the fertilizer market of the future, but this great big one is shipping fuel. Another one is power generation, and another one is use of ammonia just as a hydrogen carrier. So you're talking about sort of expanding the existing industry 6 times just to serve some of these hard-to-abate industries that don't have other options. But of course, you can't use dirty ammonia to do that because it would be completely pointless. And for that reason, we need ammonia certification. And by certification, I mean, what's the carbon intensity of your ton? Now, you can make it clean and you can make it dirty. We need to measure both. So this isn't about coming up with a nice logo on the side of your tanker that says, oh, this ammonia is good ammonia. I want to know, precisely what are the product specs? I know it's going to be 99.5% ammonia and 0.5% or less water. I want to have carbon intensity data that's as specific as that on a batch basis. And I don't want this to be modeled and default emission factors. I want it to be actual plant data. So this is what we've been working on at the Ammonia Energy Association. We've got about 60 different companies collaborating on our working groups that have been pushing this forward for 3 years. Lots of them are here. Hi, guys. And the broad principles of what we're doing is this is about technology neutral. So we're not saying green or blue. We're saying what's the carbon intensity of the product. We want to know the absolute GHG emissions. This is an easy one for the certification committee to resolve really quickly. Do we want to get into the offset markets, or do we want to just provide real data that people can say this is precisely how much GHG came out of you making a ton of ammonia? The boundary scope is well to gate, so that includes upstream methane. It doesn't include CapEx emissions. I might talk about that in a second. But the function of what we're doing here is to enable a tradable instrument. So this is a certificate that can be used to support whether it's off-take agreements from a pre-certification for a plant that's not been built yet, or product certification for shipments that are going around the world that have a known carbon intensity. I like this slide just because this image from the IEA is really confusing. And I use this to say this is why we need to just have a simple number. If you knew the carbon intensity of your product ton, you wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't be so confused by this kind of complex thinking of like grading different qualities of products into bands that may or may not be compliant depending on which country you're talking to. And this is another terrifically complex picture that I really love, because this is the problem we're trying to solve for. When you've got global hydrogen in the 2050 scenario being traded around the world in synthetic kerosene, steel, ammonia, methanol, hydrogen, liquefied or piped, all of a sudden you've got massive complexity, and we need to be solving for that. So, the projects that we're working on are very much about international harmonization. Technical people in the room might correct me and say that I'm actually talking about international alignment, because harmonization is a utopian dream that we might not live long enough to see. But we can be talking about data standards that underpin global certification schemes and global standards. We can be talking about mutual recognition, where different jurisdictions say, I like your scheme, you like my scheme, we all get along. We can do trade. And we can talk about modular certification, where you might have a global minimum standard, but that's not going to satisfy RED 3. You might need an additional set of certification going on top of that to raise the boundary of what you're doing, to raise the bar, so that that certification is of a higher quality than other certifications for markets that don't have such requirements. You guys didn't start my clock, so I have no idea how long I'm supposed to talk to. Will you just tell me when to shut up? All right. 8 more, good, I'm on time. I'm trying to talk really quickly because I'd like to have time for a question or two if anyone has them. So the first thing we did was we sat down and we looked at our draft methodology, and then we looked at everybody else's draft methodologies, most of which haven't been written or published yet, so it was quite difficult. And we compared about 40 different schemes to see, like, how are these frameworks compatible or incompatible? And you probably can't read any of the text on this slide, but that's okay, the colors are nice. You might think that the red color is a problem. It's not. That's a known thing that you would have to solve for. So that's for an example where you would take a modular certification approach. We're going to solve that for RED 2 because they don't like claiming origin and CFP of electricity the way we said we would. The real problem on this chart is all that white. That white is where people haven't written any rules. They haven't developed a methodology to deal with these use cases. So some of this white over here is how do you assign the credits for CCS if you're not sequestering all of it? If you're still producing urea and you're sequestering the rest of it, how would you solve that one? There's not a single jurisdiction around the world that's tackled that question and come up with an answer. But there's a lot of ammonia plants around the world making urea that would like to sequester their partial emissions. So in practical terms, there's a lot that we're trying to come up with that's not quite been dealt with. And we're trying to take the approach that we might be going out on a limb a bit here, but if we can base it on as the best international standards we can and tell the international standards community that there's huge gaps that need to be filled by credible organizations whose job is to fill those gaps, then as soon as they've written that, we'll incorporate it. That's sort of the approach we're trying to take, of getting this done quite quickly because we needed this yesterday, but also being compatible with, the future, which, as I say, harmonization is not perhaps attainable, but we can certainly be talking about alignment. So here are just some examples of bits and pieces we've got in our methodology. As I say, well to gate, I think that's a pretty well understood framework here. Certification of inputs, a fairly basic concept, but this was sort of one of our starting points for saying, well, we're not going to get into the certifying hydrogen or certifying carbon intensity of natural gas. You guys need to bring that data. Now, the moment I've said that, some of the people in the room is going to say, well, that data doesn't exist. We don't know the carbon intensity of the natural gas that was delivered to our plant, and we need to. And we need to get into the position where all of those inputs going into a big million-ton per year ammonia plant are known quantities. So the more we can highlight that, the quicker it will appear in the market. Certification might be a bit of a reach in the early days of this certification scheme for having actual data for your natural gas inputs or your biogas inputs, but it's certainly easy for electricity. We'll get there with hydrogen pretty quickly. We're just on the last slide, we're a long way from having this for CCS. We don't have this kind of information for carbon sequestration. And most of the carbon sequestration that happens at existing ammonia plants is actually CCS for enhanced oil recovery. So managing what the carbon intensity of that process is and getting data that an ammonia producer can provide to an auditor so that we can certify it is going to be a real challenge. And we need to get much better at getting all of the data that's going to flow into that ammonia plant. Core energy inputs probably don't have time to talk about it, but this is the idea of how, if you've got an electrolyzer sitting in a conventional ammonia plant producing maybe 1% of the output, what product do you have coming out? Do you have one product stream of green ammonia and another product stream of gray ammonia? Or do you have one product stream of 99% gray ammonia? And this is a very material question for ammonia producers who are incrementally decarbonizing their plants. And this is the principle that allows you to say, I know precisely the ratio between my different inputs of different values. Those values might be carbon intensities, or they might be renewability. There might be different concepts going in that separate your definitions of core energy inputs. But that allows you to say, well, now that I know my ratio of core energy inputs and I know my total emissions, I can tell you what the carbon intensity of each product stream was. And that's the principle on which we're managing some of the complexity of it. And that's clearly the end of my slides. I think I had one more. Yeah, the screen died. Never mind. The last thing I was going to say is, on the last slide, is we're sort of running case studies on this now, and the plan is to be piloting the certification scheme early next year, by which I probably mean middle of next year. Does anybody have any questions? I've got 2 minutes and 5 seconds. Yes, sir.
The complexity is really of the origin.
Mike, please.
You know, to find out the composition of the origin and then take this here, because the reality here is that when we are talking about certain fuel, is how this fuel came about is a long starting from the mining and then from the processing, and then after the processing, you know, coming to be a fuel. This is just a simple example of the fuels.
Yes.
But, you know, the same logic applies for ammonia or for something else. So this for me is very complex because not all fuels are alike. So, and the value of each fuel is different because of this.
And so the question here is like, there's a lot of complexity here. And I've talked primarily about measuring, quantifying greenhouse gas emissions, CO2e, but there's other questions. There's renewability, there's additionality, there's biodiversity, there's social issues, there's economic issues. And as we're getting better at figuring out what an equitable energy transition looks like, we're starting to quantify some of these things. The position we're taking is certification isn't saying whether these things are good or bad. Certification is going to be providing data so that customers and markets can say how much they value different aspects of a product. when they can see those different aspects on the shelf. And that's time. Thank you very much.